welcome to another episode of the Chronicles of Mr. I'm Mr. Pierre. And I'm so glad to be joined by Mrs. Shields. Mrs. Shields, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation, particularly because being in this space and in this time, this is a pretty funky timeline that we're in right now and the times that we're living in. And so to be able to speak to another educator, to share some gems with the other educators who are out there, who are still in the profession, I think is really positive. And I'm hoping that anyone who is in the profession at the moment will still be in the profession a year, 2, 5 years from now, because our kiddos just need educators who love what they do. To still be there in front of them. So if I can maybe start there, how did you enter into the education space?
Yeah. So I actually never thought that I would be in education. I think a lot of our stories start off very similarly, like absolutely not. Like I had no idea I would actually be a teacher. I saw my dad as a teacher. I saw him rise in education from a teacher to an administrator. And as a high school administrator, I spent a lot of my times as a kid with him at games. And I was like, if my future life looks anything like this, like I don't want it. However, there were other plans for me. So after I finished my bachelor's degree, I actually applied to Teach for America. And I know there's multiple point of views on those who enter the profession that way. I just happened to be one of the ones who actually stayed in education after going through Teach for America, became a teacher, taught kindergarten, taught third grade, and then continued to make my way through different roles in education. And I just loved it. I found that it was a passion of mine working with students and working with adults and communities. And so I've been stuck around ever since.
Awesome. If I were to ask you, knowing that everything can't be a priority, and so there are going to be certain things that have to take precedent, what would be the one thing that you would tell your younger self based off of what you just shared? Hey, I wish I knew this sooner. What would be that one thing that you wish you knew sooner?
That's a great question. I think I would tell myself just continue to be flexible, be adaptable, and prioritize being a continuous learner. I think I did that over time, but early in my career, I think I would get frustrated with the pendulum swing of education. And I think looking back, I would tell my younger self, education is constantly evolving. Some things will get better. There are certain practices that you will look back on that we did 10 years ago, and we probably would cringe and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I actually did that. So just being receptive to, as we continue to learn and grow and evolve as a society, education will too. That would be what I would tell myself.
Awesome. Is there anything that sort of kept you in this field? Because, I mean, as you just alluded to, so many of us are choosing to exit for whatever reason, and no shade to anyone who's choosing to leave the profession. But sort of what's kept you going over the many years that you've been in education?
Yeah. I think that education is one of the great equalizers of our society. It's not, and I know some people frown when people say that, or they're like, because of the so many systemic inequities that exist in this country. But when we think about the power of education, it still does have power in it. And I think that's what motivates me around it, especially as I think about our Black and Brown students and students who are maybe experiencing economic hardship. Those students are very in need of education, and they're in need of good educators. The research shows us that what the benefits of having a quality educator can be versus where a child is having an uncertified educator or a novice educator in the profession, the impacts on their learning can be substantial. So that's what keeps me coming back to the work, because I know at the end of the day that the impacts are being made. And sometimes it's beyond the academic outcomes. It's just about having that role model. I know as a campus principal, it energized me to see little girls look at me and be like, I have a principal that looks like me. So this tells me that the sky is the limit. And that kept me coming back to work every day.
That's what's up. I agree wholeheartedly that there are, if you've been in the profession long enough, then you see certain things keep popping up, sort of changing slightly, or it's cyclical and like, oh, okay, this is something else that we're going to look to iterate on again and build upon. There are certain things definitely that when you look back, if you've been at it long enough, you're like, oh, yeah, we're not going to do that again. Let's do better. Once you know better, to do better. And so I
Exactly.
appreciate that 100%. And part of the reason why I'm having this podcast is to ensure that the folks who are in front of our kiddos look like our kiddos and that their voices are being amplified. And even for the kiddos who don't look like us, they need to have folks. The research shows that when you have a Black or brown teacher in front of you, how that just increases the number of kids who then choose to go on to higher education. So it's a win-win across the board. So dope. You talked about your dad, and I think I already know the answer to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Was there an educator for you growing up who you were like, this person saw me, really connected with me, and sort of put that first idea or inkling or seed in you of like, oh, maybe education is something that I want to do?
Yeah, that didn't happen till later in life where the seed was planted. But if
Okay.
I had to think about, and my dad was an amazing educator, and I definitely enjoyed seeing him in action. But a teacher that sticks out in my mind was my fifth grade English language arts teacher. And I was, the year I was in fifth grade was actually my first year at that campus. And we know as teachers what it's like being the new kid, especially in a grade that's like non transitional. So all
Yeah.
the other kids had matriculated with each other, so they knew each other. But it was my first year at the campus. And also, my parents were going through a divorce at the time. So I just had a
Mm,
lot going on, like in my home life outside of the school. But this teacher, when you say she saw
yeah.
me and she saw so much greatness in me. And it was, yes, the academic piece. She was a great and amazing teacher, but it was also the relationship. She would pick my sister and I up on the weekends and like do little activities. And she had kids of her own. But that stood out to me because I think it's Rita Pearson who says teachers, like the students, don't learn from people who don't care about them. And I
Yeah.
knew that she cared about me. And as I became an educator, that was a principle that I held on to. Like, it's not just about the content, it's also about building relationships because relationships are foundational. And as I went on to become a principal and do the other leadership roles, relationships continue to be paramount. And funny story with that specific teacher, when I was a principal, I became her grandson's principal. So she was like, brought her baby back, told her daughter, like, put your child in Amber's school. He needs to go there. And so those relationships continue to pay themselves, pay dividends like years later after me being in fifth grade, which was really cool.
That is awesome. That is awesome. I have said often on this podcast that truly it is, as educators, we are farmers of the future, and that we don't always
I
get
love
to
that.
see like immediately those dividends that you just spoke about, but to know like here's a teacher who poured into you,
Mhm.
helped you see you, helped you grow, did all the things like you mentioned. It's for then years later, her child's child to be like, no, that child needs to be in Amber school that's pretty dope. That's dope.
Yeah, it was
And,
such a
and
cool full circle moment.
man, and what I appreciate about that too is it says to me, and tell me if you agree, like the idea of community, that we are not as educators. I know for myself, it was always an eye-opening thing that whenever I would see my teachers out in the wild, either at the supermarket or I was like, yo,
They're a
Miss,
real person.
he was like, oh snap, you like movies? You eat it. So to know, like, for our kiddos to see that, yo, we are these full people, human beings that outside of the classroom I do XYZ. Here I am outside of the classroom as well. For them to see and to feel like, oh, okay, my teacher sees me and feels me. That's pretty cool.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. Um, if I were to ask you, well, let me first ask, how many years has it been that you've been in education?
This is year 13.
Okay. And then how many years have it been since you've been a principal in
I was a
admin?
principal for 4 years
Okay.
and then assistant principal 2 years.
Okay. In those years before you went to admin, because for someone for me in the conversations I've had, from student teacher to lead teacher seems leaps and bounds. There's so much that it's like, we've talked about the theory, but then the actual practice is something totally different. And I would assume to go from teacher to admin or assistant principal, that likewise there's like, you know what, you see certain things, but you don't really know it until you're there.
Oh,
Well,
yes.
she said, "Oh
Oh,
yeah." Let's talk about it. Like,
yes.
what are some things that, hey, if I were a classroom teacher who's thinking, all right, maybe not next year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, what can I start doing now to prepare myself so that I'm ready when the opportunity presents itself? Like, hey, I'm ready to move on to that next phase.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked because this is something I'm really passionate about. And this is what I do a lot of work with aspiring leaders on, especially those who are looking to transition from being a teacher leader to a more formal leadership role. And one of the first things that are my criticisms of the profession is we do a great job developing teachers as teachers. It's a lot of
Yeah.
content.
Yep.
You're going to make you an amazing math teacher, an amazing social studies or reading teacher. But when you think about leadership development, those skills are not being built. I will
Yeah.
never forget the first time as a team leader when I was a kindergarten teacher. There was a conflict on my team, and I was like, "Well, people are disagreeing about how to navigate this situation." And I mean, no one is telling me, okay, if you have a disagreement on your grade level or your department, this is a great way to solve it. This is how you have a critical
Yeah.
conversation. These are some
Yep.
strategies you should use. But no one is pouring into teachers in that way.
Hmm.
So, my first piece of advice to aspiring leaders as they're thinking about going into leadership is developing your own leadership framework. One of the things I began to do was reading books that helped me to understand leadership, not just in education, but also in other sectors, whether that's a book or listening to a Harvard Business Review podcast on executive presence. Those type of things help you to grow as a leader. And then you can apply those things in the educational ecosystem.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say is you don't have to have a formal title to be a leader. There are so many opportunities in schools to lead. So as you take those opportunities, thinking through what are the impacts that I can have as a result of this, and then learning how to articulate about those experiences as you work to transition. And then the last piece, I think mentorship and sponsorship are very vital. It is it's a no-brainer in the corporate world, but we need to do more of that in education. So if you aspire to go into leadership, partner up with an assistant principal and say, "Hey, are you able to just walk me through your day, or is there a meeting that I could observe you hold, just so I can see like what this looks like, if this is something I'm truly interested in?" Because as we provide people with those opportunities, they're able to make more informed decisions. I had the four walls of my classroom, and then I went into instructional coach, and I'm like, well, I really actually don't know what an instructional coach does. I
Hmm.
know what I think they do. And
Right.
that's what a lot of people do in leadership. They go in blind without a full understanding of what the role actually entails.
And even something that you were just stating that I'm not sure if everyone caught, where you talked about mentorship versus sponsorship. Like, can you talk a little bit of like the differentiation between what that actually means?
Yes. So mentorship, and I think a lot of us are more familiar with the concept of a mentor because we know what it looks like to have someone who you may meet with regularly. They might give you advice, but
Yeah.
the difference is sponsorship is someone who is in rooms that you're not in.
There
So
it
I
is.
talk a lot to aspiring leaders about, okay, if you want to go into leadership, but yet you have not told your principal, you haven't told anyone for
Hmm.
whatever reason, and I can go on a whole nother tangent about the
Yeah.
problems in education and how people try to hold people back from elevating. And that's a large reason why people don't talk about their aspirations. But in the event that you have someone who's trusted that you can share, and I can come to you and say, Mr. Pierre, I'm actually very interested in going into instructional coach role. In the future, if you're sitting in a meeting and they're talking about, hey, so and so campus is hiring instructional coach, we're needing them, you could be a sponsor for me and say, actually, I
Yep.
know someone. Amber is a person that you should consider for that role. So I like to encourage people to look for those both types of opportunities, mentorship. But then if there are people who can sponsor you and who can speak on behalf of your work and your talents, then that's also equally beneficial.
Absolutely. I think that also leads to what we were talking about before in regards to community, that there are going to be people who see in you certain traits and gifts that you may
Mhm.
not always see in yourself. And so
Yeah,
perhaps you weren't thinking about the instructional coach, the dean, the
I
assistant
wasn't.
principal, or principal. But because there's someone who's like, no, I've seen I've seen Amber do XYZ in the classroom. I've seen Amber do this with her other
Mhm.
teammates. I've seen how Amber has dealt with parents. She would be perfect for this particular role. She's just not here,
Mhm.
or maybe she doesn't see it. And when that sort of spot opens up, to be able to speak to it and say, like, hey, yo, throw Amber's name in the hat for that. We'll make sure that, let me check in with her, be a mentor to help her when that moment comes. She can rise to that occasion. So, yeah, thank you for that. Because I do hear also and have experienced what you also mentioned about, like, you have a dream, you speak that dream to certain people, and then certain people don't feed into the dream or they cut
Mhm.
it, and how that can be deflating and similar to children. Like, a kid is like, hey, I like biology, and then you're like, biology, and then all of a sudden there goes
I
a
don't like
world
biology
famous
anymore.
biologist. All of a sudden now has been snuffed because your offhanded remark or whatever. Like, no, pour into whatever the person is, or see, like, you would make a great biologist. Like, I've seen you do this, this, and this. Have you ever
Mhm.
thought of, like, that curiosity to help feed it rather than just pour a cup of cold water over a flame and then
Exactly.
all of us lose? Um, yeah, thank you for that. Um, as an admin, how do you look to, I guess, just do what we were just talking about, of not sort of snuffing, for lack of a better word, either teachers or parents or
Mm.
aspiring educators? Like, how are you intentional about, hey, making sure that I know so and so mentioned this, let's make sure I bring that up, or uh, have them aware of such and such and such?
Yeah, so I think for me as a leader, because I also had experiences as a teacher where I felt like there were certain administrators that I wasn't necessarily comfortable sharing my aspirations with, I
Hmm.
made it a point of I will never hold anybody back from any experience or opportunity because there have been so many people in my life that have supported me in my dreams and my aspirations. And I just think that that is, as we continue to just support each other as leaders, that
Yeah.
starts with teachers, that starts with assistant principals who may want to rise into principalship. And so what do I gain by stopping someone else from reaching their dreams? And so
Yeah.
even when and now I actually have the opportunity of supporting district leaders and supporting campus principals. When I left the principalship at the district I worked in most recently, that was a big transition for me, but I had people then who still supported me. Like that superintendent now she's not upset. So
Mm.
I find it very interesting when people are critical of people after they make movements or they shun them or
Yeah.
they're like, oh, you're on the blacklist. Like, nope, we're not
Yeah.
talking to you anymore. And I think that's something we really have to put a stop to in education because it limits talent from cultivating and continuing to grow when we have those mindsets and just take those type of actions.
Right. I spent many of my years in middle school math, um, but I am very aware of that. The teachers in elementary schools, they were the ones who were building the foundation for kiddos. So much of is being said about electronics. If I were to pick your brain about early literacy, what are some things that teachers can do, parents can do, the community could do to help with that? Because I know something, it may seem elementary or it may seem simple in terms of, like, in math, when I'm talking about volume, that means something different if you don't understand what the context is. So, like, there would be kiddos who
Hmm.
would come in and, like, oh, we're talking about music, and, like, I understand why you're saying volume there, but mathematically speaking, in this
It's
space,
different.
this is what volume means. Like, but knowing that has to happen earlier on. What are some early literacy tips, if you would, that you could share with the community?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that, and this is not so, and I'll get to parents in a second, but as
Yeah.
far as schools and what we can do, and it's is actually not limited to early literacy. It also includes early numeracy as well, because even volume,
Hmm.
volume in most states is taught probably in third grade and maybe even in second grade. So that is
Right.
a foundational skill.
It
But
is.
what we see in a lot of states as a result of the No Child Left Behind legislation, state testing begins in third grade. So for
Hmm.
as much data and transparency that state tests have provided us, what it also has unintentionally done is caused us to kind of neglect these key grades, kindergarten through second grade, because they're not tied to a state assessment. And I'm sure you see the same thing in middle school if there are certain content areas where in seventh grade we don't test this, we only test this. Like in Texas, we test seventh grade Texas history. So the eighth grade social studies teacher kind of has a little bit of easier time. There's no state test associated with that. But in elementary grades, kinder through second grade, in some places are not viewed at the same level as the courses that have state tests tied to them. So I think that calls on schools, leaders, and teachers to have systems of accountability that still support those teachers and grade levels. I'm in Texas, and recently there was even research that said the majority of uncertified and novice teachers were being placed in those early grades. Why were they being placed in those early grades? Because there's no state test. So how do we create systems where all grade levels have high quality teachers? There is progress monitoring being done regularly to ensure that learning is happening. So as they progress to middle school, they come to you all with the needed skills to be successful. And as far as parents, I think parents being aware, and I think this is a two-way street between schools and families where you have to be communicating back and forth. We know that report cards don't tell the whole story.
Right.
And that's another issue in this country that we could probably have a longer conversation about. You're like, how did little Johnny get all A's and he can't read? How does that happen?
Right.
So there is some perception issues. A parent may be perceiving that their child is doing very well in school in the early grades because of their report card, but then there are key skill gaps that the child is experiencing. So we have to have just increased transparency with families about how their children are doing so they can adequately support, whether that's reading at night or if that's just integrating some basic foundational skills like letter names and sounds into some of their routines. I think we have to make things easy for people. And we do have a lot of technology. We have the YouTube videos, we have all the things, but sometimes it's just like, hey, mom, dad, when you're in your car with your kid, just give them a letter. They make the sound. If I say A, what sound? Ah. Like those little things that are very simple, that when parents are giving that advice, they're able to implement those activities.
Dope. Agreed. I think there are a lot of things that are being overcomplicated, but it really could be simplified. However, unless you are shown or taught or given directed to those pieces of content, and then it could just be out there in the ether. The parents are not gonna. They already have a lot on their plate, so it's going to be very difficult to be able to access it. If I were to ask you, because we were just talking about books, is there a book that you are reading for pleasure or for profession? It could be either or. There could be more than one that you would highly recommend because you're like, hey, this is one. If you are an aspiring leader, please pick it up. If you are in the classroom, please pick it up. If you're just looking for a good laugh, please pick it up. What would be on Amber's list book recommendation?
So one of the things I'm reading right now, and it's specifically for women, but you can read it too, Mr. Pierre.
That's all right.
But Playing Big by Tara Moore. And it's practical wisdom for women who want to speak up, create, and lead. And so I've really enjoyed engaging in that, especially as I've launched my own educational consulting business, supporting aspiring leaders and early career principals. It's really helping me to be like, hey, there are a lot of people supporting education more broadly. Why not me? Why not me being that person as well? And I think that is very fitting, regardless of what you're trying to do or what you aspire. If you're aspiring to go into school leadership, also an excellent book, because sometimes we all tend to play small and come up with all the reasons why no. And I'm sure you might have experienced that even when starting a podcast. Like we tell ourselves all the reasons why we shouldn't do it, but there are a million reasons why we should. And yes, there might be somebody else with a podcast, but that's not your podcast. That's not the story that you have to tell. And so this book has really helped me in thinking about how do I play bigger and just speak up and take up space in spaces that I'm invited to.
Nice. 100% agree with it. A lot of times folks think that it's like a sum zero equation of like, hey, if I have this much, or if I'm in this space, that means another voice can't be in that same space. It's like, but that voice isn't yours. So your voice matters. And so, yeah, I love it, love it, love it. If I were to ask in regards to music, if I were to ask you, hey, if we were to ask Miss Amber about her top 5 music choices, and knowing that the music can change, if I were to, hey Amber, it's 2 weeks later, a month later, 2 hours later, what would be on your playlist? What would be your either top 5 artists, top 5 songs, top 5 albums? What would make Amber's playlist at the moment?
Yes, this question is so hard because I feel like I listen to all types of music, so it really depends on the mood. So I'm gonna just go genre. Like
Okay,
right now, I've really been leaning into, I've been in my gospel era, so I've been listening to just a lot of old school 90s, like Kirk Franklin, Fred Hammond type things. Just,
okay,
I'm just in a season of needing to be motivated, needing to be inspired. Um, that's where I would go. And then I just bought tickets to this is the Millennium Tour, and it's going to be like 2000s rappers, Bow Wow,
nice,
Omarion type stuff. So
nice.
that's the type of
Okay,
music I'm listening to.
cool, cool, cool. All right. Um, I like that because I find similar to what we were saying about education that it is cyclical. I feel like in the next couple of years we're gonna get that back again of those boy bands or girl bands or whatever that the early 2000s or late 90s gave us. So
Hmm.
I feel like that's gonna make its return. So I totally feel you on the
I would
early
love to
2000s.
see it. I missed the boy band era.
It was a good time. It was a good time. I would love a new edition of New Edition.
Oh
It would be
yes, a
awesome.
new edition of New Edition would be
That would be
amazing.
awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Amber, for this conversation. This was a dope one, particularly for me. What I appreciated was what you stated in regards to that teacher who saw you, poured into you, and then years later was like, you know what? My grandbaby needs to be in that in her school. That to me is I guess the real life Mr. Holland's opus, if you will, of like it paying forward and truly being a farmer
Yeah,
of the future of like, hey, the dividends are going to come. We just gotta pour in, and know that further down the line,
it will
you'll get
pay
it back.
off for
It'll pay
sure.
off. And to any aspiring leader too, please check out the recommendations by Amber. If folks wanted to get in contact with you because they're aspiring leaders, how would they be able to do that?
Yes, I would love for them to visit my website at pmleadership.org. They can also email me at amber@pmleadership.org, where I have resources for aspiring leaders. Also, just a couple of offerings, webinars, and upcoming group coaching opportunities. And they can always follow me on TikTok. TikTok is really how I began my consulting journey. My page is principal_mommy.
Excellent, excellent. Folks, there it is. I'm Mr. Pierre. She's Amber Shields, aka Principal Mommy, and this has been another episode of the Chronicles of Mr. We're out.
Thank you.